Good morning. I guess I'm a little late today, so good afternoon. We're from a different location today. We had a few problems with AC, but I'm happy to be here. I've got a good guest. This should be a good discussion. First thing I wanted to talk about, though, before I introduce my guest, is there's an election action summit down in Costa Mesa. It is June 22nd. It is going to feature people from both Shasta County and Huntington Beach. They've kind of gone their own way on election integrity. And it will also feature Dr. Douglas Frank. You do have to register for this event. And it is at G3ca.us. So hope to see you there. If you care about election integrity and fixing what's going on in California, these are people that are trying to make a stand to be able to use local government to define their own destiny. Part of that is through charter cities. Part of that is through just simply refusing to bow before what I consider to be completely unreasonable legislature that constantly has mandates, laws, rules that tell what local people should do with their own local government, how we should spend our money, what we should do. That's almost a segue, because we're going to definitely talk about that. Today, ironically, because I play the Marine Corps anthem, it's kind of a staple on my show. First guest I ever had as the Constitutionalist podcast was a Marine. Well, today I have another Marine, one that's stepping up, trying to be elected for local office. Because local matters, folks. As much as we focus on the big races, local matters because for the most part, they affect your daily life even more. I am joined by candidate for District 6, Fresno City Council, Nick Richardson. Welcome.
Eric, great to be here again.
Why'd you decide to do this? I know, because not everybody's heard, and my audience has grown since last time you were on. So why did you choose to jump into the fight?
At the risk of being cliche, I'll quote JFK when he said, "We chose to do this not because it was easy, but because it was hard." I knew that moving out of the active duty component, moving home into the reserves, I was going to have time that I could easily come home, take the easy route, shut my mouth, go fly for the airlines, make a bunch of money. At a consulting company and doing real well. I could have gone with either of those routes, but I realized that when I did move home, Fresno, which is where I was born and raised. In fact, I was born and raised in District 6. Our representation at the city level, so our city council, is composed of 7 members, and only one of them was a conservative. And only one of them, that same man, was the only veteran we have in the city.
And he's termed out.
He's terming out. So of the hundreds of thousands of conservatives or conservative-leaning folks that we have in Fresno, all of those who care about sane, small government, big tent, low taxation, low government spending, individual responsibility, and the 20,000 veterans we have in the city were about to lose their voice entirely. So making the choice to go for the money and take the easy road and just look out for me and myself was definitely an option, but that wasn't the option that I wanted to take. So to look at my kids in the eyes someday down the road and tell them that I did something that wasn't easy, but I did something because it needed doing, and it needed to be done, especially for not just my family, but for all the folks in the city, that wasn't a mission I was willing to turn down. So I accepted it. Put my boots on and hit the streets. And the election in March, the primary, was proof that what we were doing was effective. It was a message people wanted to hear, and it was the right thing to do. So like I said, I know you actually walked your district. Most politicians only walk a little bit of their district, and they mostly employ others to walk their district. So I got to give you a lot of credit for that. What was the response when you were talking to people? Because I've walked for a lot of candidates. It was overwhelmingly positive, more than I expected. I expected a lot of slam doors. I expected a lot of dogs barking me away. I expected a lot of folks turning me away because either because I'm a conservative or because I was running for office in general. They didn't want to be bothered, what have you. But no, I would say it was overwhelmingly positive. I mean, not only did a lot of people come to the door and they say, "Are you a conservative? Are you going to stand up for me?" I would say yes. And then that was all they needed to hear. But I mean, we even had people who were across the line, right? The cross-party lines say, I've never been involved with politics before, or I've only voted Democrat my whole life, but I'm sick of watching the way the city's run, Or, hey, I'm a moderate. I don't really have one party or the other, but you're honest, you're open, you're upfront, you're the only person who came to my door. We're behind you all the way. So overwhelmingly positive. Like you said, a lot of candidates will pay. They'll hire quote unquote volunteers, or they will conscript a union or a group or an interest that has backed them to recruit all of their volunteers. And we didn't have that. There were some volunteers who walked with me, but they were all family friends. They were people who, I'd go to their door and they'd say, hey, take my phone number. If you need help, if you need volunteers, let me know. So a lot of times we'd go walk these neighborhoods with folks who were organic to that neighborhood just because they wanted to be a part of the process. And you mentioned it, a lot of candidates won't walk. And if they do, it's very small. We were told from the very beginning that it was a waste of time and that we were probably barking up the wrong tree, walking to every single house in the district. And now I happen to know by personal experience, not from data, that there are about 23,500 houses in the district. And I know that because my shoes have been in front of every single one of them.
I imagine pretty much everything except for some of the private communities which you can't get in.
Oh, I got in there.
You did.
All I had to do was wait for another car to drive in. And luckily, since we're on the Constitutionalist, political speech and political canvassing is protected under the First Amendment. It's a protected First Amendment rights, protected speech. So, yeah, sometimes I had to be faster than a security guard. But dang it, if you had a house, I was getting to it. And that includes trailer parks as well. There were three prominent trailer parks in District 6. And lo and behold, I would show up and talk to someone and they would say, you're the only candidate I've ever seen running for anything. Thank you for coming by. So that's really all it took. All it took was hard work and volunteers. And we were able to come out with a success in March.
Well, I think there is no substitute for personal contact with a person, actually having a conversation. Now, I hope those people get to the polls because let's face it, Fresno County is pretty abysmal as far as the percentage of people, though this should be a higher turnout because presidential years are always a higher turnout. Your opponent became a Republican at the last minute. I'm not sure what to say about that, but he became a Republican just a few days before there was the possibility of getting an endorsement. I will have him on. I will let him answer in his own way, but people need to know that.
That's correct. And he will be able to say whatever he would like. All I have to say, I thought I welcome him to the party. I knew I was a pretty good Republican, but I had no idea I was a good enough Republican that I'd accidentally convert my opponent. And here we are. So welcome.
I think that largely because of the pressure you put on, that's why you made that choice. But again, sense. I'll let him decide that in his own words.
Sure.
I don't think he's a bad man. But I definitely have a lot of questions for him. What is the role of government?
The role of government, I would say, is to increase at any level, is to improve the quality of life of the individuals who live in that government. Now, what that means, in my opinion, is a lot of times getting the hell out of the way and letting people do what they need to do to succeed, to chase after their own life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And unfortunately, I will give the benefit of the doubt, and I will say, in what is probably well-meaning attempts, government overreaches and oftentimes squashes the ability of individuals to chase after their own life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Okay, I don't disagree with you on that, but I would say that for me, government's most important job is to protect my liberties. They're my representative. They're protecting my liberties. They should be looking at through that lens first. That doesn't counteract anything you said. I just would say it a little differently. So, limited government whenever possible. I think maximum choice because the individual can decide whether it's a business or truly just an individual. They can decide for themselves what should be done better than government almost always. Totally now, there's some people struggling. This is one of the largest issues in Fresno. There's a lot of people that are struggling with either drugs, mental health issues, both, and they're down on their luck, and they're called the homeless. And Gavin Newsom has done an incredible job because he said, well, I want to bring diversity, equity, and inclusion to the whole state. And he said he was going to fix the homeless problem. What we didn't realize was what that meant was he was going to make sure that every house had a homeless person to take care of.
Equally.
Yeah. So every home seems to have somebody homeless. And I somewhat jokingly say that, but he threw $24 billion at it. He doesn't want an audit. And all it did was become a much bigger problem. Now, as a representative city government, assuming you're elected, you're going to have to deal with that problem. How do you deal with homelessness?
Step one, and I've said this from the beginning, if the homeless problem continues to grow, and one can picture it like a leaky faucet, right? Just continuing to leak water. The solution to that is not putting a bigger and a bigger and a bigger bucket under the leak. The first step is cutting off the leak. You got to turn off the water. You have to stop new people from becoming homeless. Step two, you got to get that water out of there. If it's infecting, if it's infecting the walls, if it's getting into the crown molding or the base plates or whatever else. So those who are criminals, those who are from out of the state, those who are from out of the country, those who are here illegally, step one is to get them out of here. To send them. I mean, the homeless problem right now, if you were to go out and check for IDs or check for outstanding warrants or checking for those who are on the lam from Nevada or from Oregon or from Idaho, places as far east as New York, because they hear that California is very friendly to homeless, that's exactly why they're coming here. And they'll hop on a train. They'll do whatever they need to do to get here. So step one is getting rid of the folks who we don't, as California or as a city, owe free welfare.
That's
now,
fair.
Those who are here, who does that leave afterward? That leaves those, like you mentioned, those who are suffering from mental health issues, those who are suffering from substance abuse issues, which you can loop in with mental health if you'd like. But it's very much perpetuated on the legal side as well.
They're not always the same, but they're often intertwined.
Correct.
Is a fair way to put that.
And I see addiction as an illness. And yes, not everyone who has mental health issues is on some sort of drug, and vice versa, you can probably say as well. But the fire triangle, as I like to say, between mental illness, drug use, and crime definitely perpetuates the homeless problem we have. And we talked about government taking a small role and not getting in the way of people's individual liberties. Well, when you go out and you provide them a needle exchange site that is close to recreation areas for children, where you go and allow them a place that you can exchange your dirty crack pipe for a new crack pipe.
And by the way, Fresno County does both these things.
Correct.
And Fresno City specifically does these things.
Fresno City allows Fresno County the areas to do it. Yeah, that's the way the money and the way that the materials come down is from the state to the county. Because the city doesn't have any mental health, essentially any backbone for its mental health structure, it's county mental health that takes over with that. Homelessness, you can ask your city councilman, they'll tell you, oh, it's a county problem. Well, it's not a county problem. It's a city problem as well. And until we start taking responsibility as a city, the county will do whatever they need to do to continue perpetuating these problems of mental illness and drug abuse. So we've talked about getting rid of the ones who don't need to be here. We talked about preventing new people from becoming homeless, right? And what that means is getting the government out of development. If I want to develop a nice apartment complex over there and make it relatively affordable for folks, but now I have to deal with the city government putting a project labor agreement on that tells me I have to hire 95 of my labor from a union out of the city.
Which is going to cost more.
Absolutely, it's going to cost more because now I'm not just paying for the labor. I'm paying for the transport of all of those employees to come from Modesto or Merced or Tulare or Visalia or Bakersfield or somewhere else that doesn't contribute to my local economy. I'm paying for their housing. I'm paying for their per diem, everything else. I'm paying their union dues for all of that labor. So it drives up the cost of production. And that is that is directly the government saying, hey, business who wants to house people, you cannot do what you came to do without going through us and giving us our chop first.
Well, part of it's the business problem. Part of it is that the state has said you must have affordable housing and you must do it in this way. They don't even allow you to have very much choice or latitude. It's all these strings and rules that come with it.
Beauty lies in creativity. And if you don't have the opportunity to come up with creative solutions, especially ones that don't cost people money, you're really hamstrung by the government above or below you.
I see it as really a huge problem. And I don't see how government fixes homelessness. I see the successful programs that I'm aware of all involve private individuals. Almost without exception, they're faith-based because it gives hope. If you don't provide those people with hope and a path forward and some training, because let's face it, we're going to have to do some of that, or we're going to leave them on the street, which is obviously not working. And then those programs tend to force accountability. How do you bring accountability to something like that?
So that's a double-edged sword. And one of my opponents from prior in the race, who's not in the race anymore, very thoughtful, very loving, very faith-based person. And I respect this person very much. But this candidate's platform was the way we solve homelessness is all through nonprofits and volunteer groups and this and that. Well, here's the issue with that. If you're holding your government responsible for fixing a problem that affects everyone, like homelessness, and the government is relying on faith-based organizations and nonprofits to do their thing, how do you guarantee that it's going to be done? You know, if I was in charge of flying my helicopter into combat and I said, well, we're going to wait for volunteers to come fly this helicopter for me because they're really the best pilots. That's fine. But what about when the mission doesn't get flown? Who is held to account when the mission doesn't get flown? So crossing our fingers and hoping that churches will take charge and hoping that the, Fresno mission will take over and the Poverello House will all of a sudden get a huge grant, for the government to just hope those things is unfortunately very Pollyannish, right? That's hoping that someone else will fix the problem for you does not the problem fix. And the second,
but I do think they're more effective when it's a good program, but your point is real.
Now there's the second part of it. They do run very effective programs, and whether they are faith-based, whether they're not faith-based, whether their goal is to get them some sort of education, whether their goal is to get them into housing, get them in some sort of recovery program, there's fantastic opportunity there. But this, again, is the government swallowing its own pride. You have to allow access to these organizations. You have to allow them a voice at the table. You have to allow the Poverello House, and they have to allow the Homeless Coalition, and you have to allow the Fresno Mission access to, whether it's a database that you have, or whether it's certain events that you need them, or whether you help them get the infrastructure they need to provide these services for people. You have to allow them access. You can't sit back passively and just hope the problem gets solved by someone else. We've seen that. I mean, we've seen that with high-speed rail. We've seen that with the way water legislation is passed in the state. We've seen that with increasing the numbers of first responders that we have available. We've seen that with natural disaster prevention. Sitting back and hoping and crossing your fingers. Hope is not a course of action. Hope is not a COA, as we say in the military, COA. So having that course of action is not enough in and of itself. You have to be able to allow them access and provide them the infrastructure and the backbone to be able to do those things.
So you're basically saying that government would need to lead the way and empower them, give them opportunities to do the job, as opposed to and hold them accountable along the way.
And yeah, I would even I'd go a step further. I wouldn't even say it's government that has to do that, because relying on the government to fix a problem is also usually
local,
not the way.
But I'm talking local in this
I would
case.
say you have to have leaders. I would say you have to have leaders. And ideally, yes, in a perfect society, your leaders, the greatest leaders in your civilization, in your area, in your district, your jurisdiction, are those who you've put in a place of authority. But we know that's sometimes not the case.
No, we definitely elect people that I don't think they're servants, and I don't think they're leaders.
I would concur with that.
And I go to a lot of government meetings. I've been to, since COVID, I've been to well over 100. Spoken almost every time. They tend to know me well. Some of them like me, some of them don't. I don't go to Fresno City Council just because I live in Clovis. But
I'm representing you at Fresno City Council. I go to all those meetings. Don't worry. But that's honestly another reason that I decided to run, because I was tired of meeting. Whether it was an event or a speech or a city council meeting, what have you, tired of meeting individuals who we've elected to represent us, whether it's at the city level, the state level, the county level, what have you. And they had the inability to look me in the eyes and tell me the truth, or tell me something I didn't want to hear, right? Folks that couldn't lead you out of a wet paper bag if they tried, who we've put in places to not only make decisions that represent people, but just to lead. The Marine Corps is the most leadership-obsessed organization in the world. And I know because it was beaten into me since 2009. And if you look back prior to my enlistment in early 2009, I think, I was beating it into myself with all of the Marine Corps books I was reading about the song that you played before, and about guys like Major Terry Sladek and Chesty Puller and Dan Daly and John Basila. We're obsessed with leadership. And so coming home, getting out of the active duty military, where I served with some of the greatest leaders, I'm convinced, in the entire world, and coming back to what appears to be a leadership vacuum. That's not saying that no one in the position here is a leader. We have some great leaders in the city, but not all of them. And the ones who have a real opportunity to make some change are some of the ones who will let you down the most. And that's aside from the overwhelming enthusiasm that people had for me walking to their doors, that's the second thing that has really surprised me throughout this process. Just the vacuum of true dedicated servant leadership.
Servant being one of the most important parts of that. On that note, we're going to go ahead and take a break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. So when we come back, and we'll come back in just a second, I would like to shift gears a little bit and deal with how do we deal with the incredible debt. I want to say thank you to everybody that's listening on social media. Please please hit the bell notification so you know when the show's coming on. Please comment. Please share. All those things help this show. Let's go ahead and come back. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Today, I am joined by Nick Richardson. He is running for District 6 in Fresno City for the city council position. Welcome. Fresno's, what was it, $70 million in debt?
About 40.
40,
Last
okay.
time I counted.
I listen to so many different, I get my numbers mixed up. If I don't have them written down, I'm not always on. 40 is still a huge problem. How do you do things like keep up staffing levels? Because two of the biggest jobs is those emergency services. How do you pay for those when you're in that kind of debt? What would be your plan? How would you deal with that?
So that to me is a priority. It's like making your mortgage payment or, paying rent. That before all other things needs to be done first. Right. So I was in a city council meeting yesterday, and currently what they're doing is they're going over the fiscal year 25 budget and analyzing the different departments and how much each is making. And like you said, the budget, the balance of the budget was going to come in at a deficit for the city. So the city had to find a way to make cuts, make changes, make sacrifices where they could. And unfortunately, I sat there and I watched the chief of police, Billy Alcorn, explain to the city council for about 20 minutes the different organizations or permutations of firefighting capabilities they could offer in order to save the city, $1 million or upwards of, beyond $1 million. And the entire time I was sitting there, I was thinking, why of all the different government entities that we're looking to save money from, why are we looking at our first responders? If anything, they should be the absolute last resort when it comes to saving money for a city. And when you talk about pay increases for elected representatives, that's a great place that I think you should start. In fact, I haven't worked through the line by line of this current budget because they're still debating it currently at City Hall. But with the last one, I was able to find about $22.9 million that was money that didn't need to be spent. I'm not an accountant by trade, and I won't pretend to, but here's what I mean, that money that didn't need to be spent that way. If you have a branch of the government, let's say it's the swivel chair department, and in the swivel chair department, they spend $1 million a year. Now, the swivel chair department needs that $1 million in order to pay for their staff, in order to pay for their supplies, in order to get through, whatever jobs they need and pay for their gas to and from work sites, things of that nature. If you provide an emergency fund for the swivel chairs department, who spends $1 million a year, that is $5 million, you are essentially planning for the entire city of Fresno, except for that one office, to be swallowed up by magma. And now they have to operate on their own with no income for 5 years. How realistic is that? If you ask me, I say it's not realistic. Your emergency fund should be able to cover, just like they teach us in investing, your emergency fund should be able to cover you for about 6 months to a year. Maybe something crazy like COVID happens and you need a couple years. Okay, that's $2 million. Why do you have 5 times your annual expenditure in an emergency fund? So just counting up things like that, one could call them accounting errors. One could call them earmarks. You can call it whatever you like. But that's the money that's coming out of, at the end of the day, police officers or firefighters or training facilities or a first responder dispatch facility. That should be our very last go-to. So when it comes to saving money, I guess short answer long, the first thing you need to do is have those discussions in public, which they weren't done before this year. They were done in private, back behind closed doors, about where we're going to spend the money and making sure that this interest and that interest gets their.
Well, that's a violation of the Brown Act.
Correct. That's why they're doing it outside in the open now. I don't know if someone didn't know, or maybe the city attorney, his calls weren't returned or what have you. But absolutely, all those decisions, again, as long as the government is operating in secrecy, it's not a government for the people.
Right. The only times they can go into closed session for that kind of thing is when it involves employee negotiations.
Talking
the rest of it
usually about lawsuits.
Usually about lawsuits, but it could also even be about pay, though they would then have to come back after the negotiation, and it needs to be public. That's just Brown Act. California actually got something right in this case, in that there are rules for meetings, which means anybody can go speak. You don't even have to be from that area. You can't be stopped. And now sometimes they might stop you if you're speaking in a particular area of the agenda that has nothing to do with what's going on. But there is also an open period where you can speak. And they can't just be interrupting you. That's at best poor practices. At worst, it's Brown Act violations if they stop you from speaking.
And the public comment portion is usually the most lively of any city council meeting. After having been to dozens and dozens over the last year, I can tell you that from experience. Everyone comes up and gets 3 minutes, or they can call in from Zoom if they're not able to make it in person. And those 3 minutes often get lively. And yesterday there were some complaints about, hey, why are you making us identify ourselves and give you our names, stand in line or what have you, or, hey, we can't talk anymore because the time period's over. That's not what we deserve as a populace. And sometimes the members of city council will listen and nod their heads, and sometimes they'll get up and go to the bathroom, or sometimes they'll be on their phones, or sometimes they'll be, yucking it up with their partner 3 seats down behind the dais.
What I find is if they're yucking it up, I stop, because if it's loud enough, I can hear it. And I've done this particularly at Fresno Unified School District Board meetings. So there'll be 2 people that are talking. I'll put my hands out. I'll look right at the chair and say, look, I can hear them. They are violating my rights. This is my time to speak. You need to restart the clock so that I can finish my speech.
Everyone should say that.
They don't like me, but too bad.
But they work for you.
Mm-hmm.
And they were put in that seat because of people like you and people like me who have voted for them to do our work for us. Because the rest of us have jobs or campaigns that we're actively running, or we're serving somewhere, So people forget, and I think often elected leaders forget, that they are not put there to own the seat. None of those seats behind the dais belong to any one person. They belong to the district. You are there as an employee for the people. So when you decide that you deserve a 75% pay increase, that seems a little fishy to me, because in the military, if we could all vote for our own pay raises and the Department of Defense had nothing to say about it, we'd have billionaires wearing a couple stripes and marching around out on the parade deck every day.
So this isn't just talking about this in theory. Fresno City Council actually voted themselves a massive pay increase.
75%.
75%. This really happened, folks. This is why having good people elected could save you money, could have a more efficiently run city. We're currently sitting in Clovis, and I believe that Clovis is run in a much more efficient manner and a much more open manner than Fresno. Because who you elect matters. Aside from the budget, what's the next big issue for Fresno, for the city of Fresno?
So the budget, those who are very well informed will take issue with that, and they'll go through it with a fine-tooth comb, like myself. Above all, it is safety. And safety, you can look at safety from the crime standpoint. You can look at safety from the lack of first response, rapid response time. You can look at it from the sense that homelessness is moving into places of the city where it previously wasn't a problem. But the neighborhood where I grew up used to be the doors open, bikes on the lawn. You can smell mom's cooking dinner, what have you. Friends can come over, friends will come, friends will go. And now it is a door with a double deadlock and a security door on the outside. And you've got the Ring doorbell, and they've got the security cameras, the motion activated lights, the beware of owner, beware of dog, beware of probably cat also. Anything to keep people away from where they live. And that directly speaks to security. And I can speak to that from experience, because that's not even just the nice houses that are in the north part of town. That's the places that are in the gated communities. That's trailer parks. That is the homes in the lower income areas of town.
I've walked those, and I was shocked at how many of those homes have a Ring camera.
Yes. People are concerned about their safety, and for good reason.
Well, it's because in California, what used to be thought of as petty crime, and there used to be at least some consequences for it, they've eliminated almost all those consequences. Well, when you don't give any consequences for something, you essentially are rewarding bad behavior, and you get more bad behavior. So crime is obviously a huge issue.
Well, it's a 3-part recipe, right? In order for people to feel unsafe about this crime, you have to have 3 things. 1, you have to have people to do the crime. And as far as we talked about before, how homelessness is very closely intertwined with mental illness and drug abuse. As folks who are in that place in life make their way into places where they can perform a crime, or where they need to sustain themselves by illegal means, you're going to start seeing more of that. The second thing you need is for that crime to be either legalized or to have the repercussions of that reduced. And we've seen that with state bills that have come that have, you talked about petty crime, that have taken the threshold of what theft means, felony theft, and moved that up incredibly. to now you can walk into a store and steal $150 worth of stuff, and the poor employees of Target can't stop you, and the police probably won't respond because by the time they get there, the crime's done anyway. So it's the second
So you're
thing.
slightly wrong. I want to correct you. That's $950, not $150.
Oh, I'm saying you can steal $150 worth of things, and you can steal $250, you can steal $350,
You can steal up to $950
up to $950, correct?
and have that exact. Otherwise, go ahead.
Correct,
I just wanted
correct.
people to realize how bad this is.
Yes, they've raised it, as he pointed out, to $950, almost $1,000 that you can steal without it becoming felony theft.
And as many times a day as you were motivated to do it.
There you go. Which, if you are tight for cash and you have a hatred for law and order, then there you go. But the third thing you need a lack of ability to respond, the lack of ability to enforce that rule. And as long as we keep cutting the budget or saving money by taking off first responders to include police and fire and sheriff's department and CHP, whoever you'd like, it's the trifecta. That's their 3-part recipe right there. What does that make? It makes a big pie that makes people feel unsafe. That is right there what makes people, want to order their DoorDash or their, Grubhub or whatever else to their house and not go out. It makes them not want to go shopping with their children. It makes them not want to take their kids to the park or go to community events because they don't want to be exposed to that and they don't want their children exposed to that. Again, for good reason.
For Clovis, I can't speak to Fresno. About 80% of the budget is first responders. And about 80% of the money that comes in is divided in 2 places. It's either sales tax or property tax. I'm assuming it's very similar for Fresno because geographically we're essentially right next door.
I think that's realistic. Yesterday, I was there for the fire department, not the police department presentation during the budget. And I know I believe their current budget for this next year is $114 million, which of a total budget of $2 million, you're looking at, just above 5-6%. So once you add police, it's probably pretty similar in Fresno as far as expenditure. But I'm also a fan here of not solving problems with money, not throwing money at problems as the only solution to fix these things. And here's what I'm talking about. So in talking with the police and fire department, I've realized that we have an issue right now, not necessarily with hiring or acquisition of new talent, but with retention of experienced firefighters, experienced police officers, experienced sheriff's deputies. So once they get to the edge of their career or toward the end of their career, the way their retirement system is weighted, they then have the option to stay, say, the last 4 or 5 years in Fresno and serve the people here, the community they've been working for decades, or they can move to Madera or Tulare or Visalia or Clovis, and they can go make a little bit more money that kind of sweetens their benefits as they move out of first responder life. So if you are a resident in Fresno, or let's just say if you're a leader in Fresno and you have a vested interest in keeping first responders in your city, not only to where they can retire there and keep their experience local, but also so they can raise their children there. Because let's be honest, the kids who make problems in school or issues for the teachers are not the kids of the police officer or the firefighter.
Very seldom.
Yes, exactly. So how do we keep them in the city? How do we show them the city cares about them enough and make it an incentive for those first responders, those heroes, to stay in our area and to reinvest themselves back into the community in a different way? Well, what percentage of retiring first responders have children? I'll save you the math. It's over 90%. So over 90% of them have children. And when you're looking to displace or move your family, there are probably 2 things or 3 things you take into consideration. One of them will be the cost of living wherever you're about to move. 2 are employment opportunities wherever you move. And 3 is your family, not necessarily in that order. But the third big thing you're taking into account is your family. If you have children who are school age, and that's anywhere from daycare to college, you are concerned with your kids have to make new friends. They've got to go to a new school. Where will their school be? What's the quality? How much will it cost me? Public education from K through 12 is nominally free.
Mhm.
Daycare is not free. In fact, daycare can be more expensive than college in a lot of cases. College is not free, right? Especially when you've got schools in the area that don't even accept things like the Yellow Ribbon program. You can use your GI Bill. Things like that don't exist for everyone. So what if we were to find a way to alleviate some of the pressures from these first responders, to give them an incentive, somewhat monetary incentive, to keep them and their families in town by saying, hey, we're going to give you discounted rates on daycare for your children. We're going to give you discounted rates on private school for your kids, or on a local university, be it Fresno City or be it, Fresno Pacific, a private college. That seems like it would be, that's $20,000, $30,000 a year, depending on which of those institutions. And that's provided you have one child who's in it that you can give to them, which is way more than the government giving money at a problem. just throwing dollar bills, hoping to solve things and begging on their hands and knees for these first responders to stay. That's actually making it worth it to them. Now, I decided I didn't need to be in City Hall to make this change, so I started putting it together. I devised a Fresno Regional Incentivized Educational Network of Discounted Schools, the FRIENDS program, because all Marines love a good acronym. And I started going to these.
They do.
I started going to these private schools and just asking why not. Why not? I went to Cardin first. That's where I went when I was a little kid, on Maple and Maple and Herndon. And I said, do we have a problem that offer a program that offers discounted tuition for the children of first responders or even veterans? And they said, well, gosh, no. I talked to the head of schools there, beautiful lady, lovely, lovely person. She said, no, we don't have a program like that. And I don't know why we do or why we don't. I said, well, what are the odds that we can get something put in place? She goes, 100%. Let's work on getting it done. And then I went to Fresno Christian down the street, down Herndon. And I said, hey, do we have a program, same, that offers discounted tuition to the children of first responders or veterans? And he said, well, no, that's a fantastic conversation. We should go have that with the board because I don't see why we shouldn't. And I went to Fresno City and I had the same conversation. And I went to Fresno Pacific and I had the same conversation. I've gone to Kids Care. So this takes no money from the government. It takes the printing that y'all even pay for of a couple placards saying, hey, we are part of the Friends Network. We advertise this to the police officers, the firefighters, the sheriff's department, CHP, veterans in the area as soon as they begin their service. And we say, this is the city investing in you, not just with money, but in the future, in your children's education, in your future, in your experience, and in your ultimate choice to stay here or leave. That's the kind of creative problem solving that we need at all levels of government. So why not start in the city?
That's one way to go, though. If your big places where you can, where the city brings in its money are property tax and sales tax, what could you do to unleash the potential? So for property values to go up, essentially people have to feel safe and want to move here.
Correct.
To create demand. And for business, safety is essential, a first element. You know, there are parts of the city that I go to I feel like I always have to watch my back, even though I know the people in the area. It's just smart to always watch your situation because there are essentially people that are not good people in some areas. Mm-hmm. It's too bad, but there are gang infested areas, particularly in Fresno. So I think a lot of it still comes back to that. But how do you unleash the private sector?
Let me give you two creative solutions that will cost the government no money. One of them is coming to a city-county tax sharing agreement that will make it cheaper for developers to develop on land. Anywhere in the city, also obviously contained in the county. I already talked about project labor agreements. Get rid of those project labor agreements. Make it cheaper for individuals. And project labor agreements, to be clear, apply to any city-backed, funded, sponsored program that is over $1 million. Some of those by the Fresno Housing Authority fall into that. But the city-county tax sharing agreement affects everybody. That's what's driven a lot of our developers out of the area saying they don't want to do business in Fresno anymore. So if you want that property tax, you've got to be able to sell that land, make it buildable, make it livable, and put it in a community where people want to live. If not, you're going to have more demand, or correction, you're going to have more supply and less demand, and no builder is going to enter a market like that. Now, the second thing, that's talking about just property tax. Let's talk about sales tax for a second. So a huge preponderance of the sales tax that's pulled in by the city is pulled in by car dealerships. They are a huge portion, whether it's District 6, District 2, it doesn't really matter. The city makes a ton of money off sales tax specifically from car dealerships. And the only reason I know this is because I've gone around to all the car dealerships in my district and some neighboring districts in the last couple months because it's important. And they said, all we need from you is we just need to be allowed to run our business without government interference. And a huge example of the success or failure of a government dealing with private business is what we did during COVID. Clovis stayed largely open during COVID, and owners who own two different dealerships, one in Fresno, one in Clovis, will tell you the Fresno dealership struggled. I mean, they were clawing just to stay in business. And in Clovis, it was just a Wednesday. They had similar numbers. They were selling cars.
Well, I don't know about cars.
Probably better because people were coming from Fresno over to Clovis.
For Old Town, Clovis became a destination. And
the miracles of small government well run. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to increasing sales tax, keep the government out of people's businesses. We'll use car dealerships for a great example. And when it comes to property tax, make it more affordable for developers to develop the land, which in turn, shocker, that price that gets pushed down to the end user or the tenant also gets lowered. And it makes housing more accessible to people. And it stops new folks who are one life crisis away from becoming homeless.
We're going to go ahead and take our last break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. I always like to focus on hope and solutions. I do have one more question before we get to hopes and solutions. Let's go ahead and come back. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Today I am joined by District 6 Fresno City Council candidate Nick Richardson. My last question is, so much in the way of politics has happened and the world has become so divided. You kind of got drawn into that, fairly or unfairly, when you went to a meeting. And there were definitely some pro-Palestinian people in that group. I know there were other people in that group. Anything you want to say about that?
Not necessarily. I think that, anyone who's faith-based will tell you that when Jesus were invited to go speak to a group that didn't agree with him, or maybe they were the Pharisees, or maybe they were, this group or that group, didn't rebuke him, didn't turn him down, and led with love. And that's the way that I plan on running my campaign. That's the way I plan on serving as a city council member. And there are a lot of people who I have met with and will meet with in the future that we disagree inherently on some issues. And that doesn't mean they don't deserve a voice. And that doesn't mean I won't listen. And that doesn't mean I'm going to make decisions that will make them happy. But that means that if I want to be a representative for District 6, I want to be a representative for everyone in District 6. Their voice will be heard. I will listen to you. I will come to your door if I need to. And I will continue doing that as long as this is my profession.
Okay. You did something that I thought was pretty interesting. Because a city and the workforce that it has is so dependent on education, you've gone and subbed a bit for Fresno Unified. What's that experience like?
So I have. And there's a portion of the Clovis Unified School District that overlaps with Fresno, and that's where I spend most of my time.
Okay, so
But point being, I'm a big proponent that if you want to learn about something, you have to get in there and learn it yourself. It's the reason I go to city council meetings. It's the reason I've been to all the fire stations. It's the reason I went to the car dealerships. If you want to be able to speak intelligently about what's going on with the schools, what the demands of the teachers are, what the kids are being exposed to, what the parents' reactions are, you have to get in there and learn it firsthand. So I decided that that was something that I was going to value, right? The relationship between the schools, students, and parents during this campaign, because if it matters to people out there, hell, it matters to me. So it's been a fantastic experience. I have kids raising their hand all the time and say, "Hey, Mr. Richardson, I saw a sign out for you on the corner," or, "Hey, we saw that you did some campaign event. Do you need volunteers?" In fact, we did the Clovis Rodeo Parade, and a bunch of my students decided to come out and walk with us because they wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. Politics aside, they just wanted to see what it was like. So it's been a fantastic experience. Honestly, I now know that what we are afraid of, what we hear on the news, that children are being pumped full of this or pumped full of that. Two things. One, I think it's a little bit isolated because I didn't see any of that in Clovis Unified. And that was at the, elementary level, junior high level, high school level, multiple different schools, different neighborhoods, different subjects.
There is a little bit at Clovis Unified. I know it well, but it's generally a pretty solid district.
And yes. And again, like I said, pretty isolated, I believe. And the second thing is, kids and to some extent parents really value having an educator, because whether you like it or not, whoever's standing up in front of the classroom is an example for the children. Mm-hmm. They may be a good role model, they may be a bad role model, but they are actively acting as an example of what an adult is or should be in society. So I think I have nothing bad to say about any of the teachers I've taught with or taught for, or what have you. They're fantastic people who decide to take not very much money to do something that society desperately needs. But there is a value to having an educator from time to time who is not just one of experience in education. If you've gone to school, and then went back to school to do school, you're probably really good at school.
Yes, but you've only learned that particular pattern frequently.
There are some lessons that I think kids need to be taught. And you can scroll through your crazy uncle's Facebook and see a lot of these things too, that kids these days don't know how to drive a stick or tie a tie or change a tire.
Yes, but there's other things they can do.
There are other things they can't. Some of them are terrifying, but yeah. Yes, that was my opportunity to get out there and be an example for them of someone who has not just lived in academia, but has gone out and had world experience, that has gone out and I've changed a tire. I grew up driving stick. I've worked on a construction site. I've been abroad and been the only person in a room who speaks English. And that's something they're not often exposed to. So it was a great experience. I'm done doing it now. The semester's over. I feel like I have gathered enough solid data points and built the relationships that we can go through the summer and focus entirely on the campaign now.
Well, while the school district and the city government are separate, they should be connected because the success of one leads to the success of the other.
Oh, goodness. We're going to have a whole podcast about the Fresno
we don't-
Unified School District.
Yes. And I have before. It's a basket case, but Clovis is better. You know that twice a year they have a meeting between the city council and the school board.
And the school board.
Fresno, on the other hand, they have a county-wide one. And I know of 2 different years where not a single representative from the Fresno school board showed up at the larger county meeting to talk about education. Clovis people did, but not a single person on the Fresno school board bothered to show up for 2 years. And then in the 3rd year, the only person that showed up was Major Sladek when he was still unelected.
I'm glad you brought him up because I would proffer a link to one of his various liturgy of talks about Fresno Unified School District and what accountability really means and what leadership should look like in an educational institution.
Well, you're welcome to do that if you choose. We're down to about 4 minutes, a little less. Why are you hopeful? What are the solutions? How do we fix what's going on in your district? Because let's face it, don't worry about the bigger problems, folks. Worry about fixing what's in front of you. So what would you do?
Why I'm hopeful is because I know that running our campaign effectively with our attention on the right things and doing things the right way, no matter what, is a message that people are desperate to hear. And if I have a chance to be that leader and I can get that message out to folks, I will, again, literally walk to every single door to tell them that message. I was very enthused with the voter turnout, the vote share that I got in the primary, and knowing that every other candidate who has not made it to this point in this race has endorsed me, has fueled my fire even more, ensuring me that I'm doing things not just effectively, but also the right way. So that's what I want to continue doing. We have the leadership. I have creative solutions. I am driven on this mission to help people, to serve people honestly, and not to build some sort of political dynasty.
Well, I noticed that you tend to do research. You tend to actually work. I appreciate that. A lot of candidates, they just go about their life and they decide, well, I'm going to step up. And while that's good, it's even better if you can then go get some actual experience in a field or truly research it. And that is often missing. They don't treat it like it's a job.
If you're going to get up and fly a helicopter, I'm going to touch every single part of that helicopter before I get in it and fly it. And I don't find any job in public service any different than that.
Well, but that's kind of a unique Marine characteristic. Most people are not that thorough, not that focused. And let's face it, a lot of people just kind of go through life not meeting their potential.
I think that right there is what distinguishes me from other candidates. In addition to another thing, and I'll point this out very quickly. So you'll notice that I'm wearing our campaign hat. This one's a little dirty because I've been wearing it for 7-8 months now. Our next shipment doesn't come until next week, but I wasn't going to leave here without a little something. So in honor of, you mentioned Terry Sladek, the first guest, the Marines hymn, which we got to hear, a little throwback, a little gift I have for you from February to March of 1945. The United States Marines, to include gentlemen like John Basilone, were fighting what was an uphill battle to gain land to make their way to the homeland of Japan. And this battle was fought on Iwo Jima. And even though it was a seemingly insurmountable task and the enemy was very well dug in, and they were literally fighting an uphill battle up to the top of Mount Suribachi, they kept at it. They pushed on, and as they watched people to their left and their right fall, that didn't stop them. So when I was on my last deployment in Japan, to include some other islands that belonged to Japan, we were allowed a small group who was allowed to go to Iwo Jima and go pay their respects. So
very cool.
From the base of Mount Suribachi.
Oh, very cool.
I'd like you to have your own vial of Iwo Jima sand.
You know, one of my regrets, loved my grandfather dearly, but he would never speak about his World War II experience as a Marine. He wasn't an officer till the last year and a half, but he did 20 years. And he would never let me be in the room. I could sneak in occasionally and hear some of the stories, but I never got to talk to him about that. But he's definitely left a mark on me. Marines make a difference, and we need to appreciate all our veterans. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXCX, the best talk in town. So go ahead and if people like what you have to say, they want to support you, how do they find you?
I'd like to find us, you can go ahead and look on Facebook, Richardson for District 6. Find us on Instagram at Nick's Got My Six, the number 6. You can just go to nick6.com. That'll point you straight to me. Or just give me a call, 559-295-2850. I'd be happy to listen to anybody who has something they want to tell me.
Well, I sure thank you for this time, my friend.
Eric, always good to be here.